going to join us online. And then Gertrude Matsika from the Office of the UN Residence Coordinator in Zimbabwe. She's also among our panelists. Madam Chaturuka. So those are the 4 panelists. So that means we've got 3 panelists amongst us here physically, and then the other one is virtually. So in the interest of time, we are going to allocate each other 5 minutes maximum tops. For
All right, I'll take 1 more minute so if you stop laughing.
all right, okay, Mr. Swanda wants to set an example. Thank you.
But I'm good at bribing, so I might bribe you and get 10 more minutes. All right, guys. By a show of hands, how many of you have heard the words 6 transitions or investment pathways? Just by a show of hands. At the local level, municipal level. So this is our challenge, guys. So how are we going to achieve the SDGs if the people who are closest to the communities that need our services do not know what the 6 transitions are all about? So your hands are full, whether you are NPC South Africa or whether you are Silocious in Harare or whether you are Nuvia in Mozambique. We need really to make sure that the discussions that happen at the global level, the main ideas that are supposed to drive development, do come down to the communities or authorities that really are close to the people. So my presentation, there are many slides, but I will not focus on all of them. You're going to get the slides. They'll be on our website, so you can always go back and look at them if you want some additional details. So next slide. So, all right. So in terms of background, right, as you all know, our leaders were in New York in 2023 at the SDGs Summit, where they reviewed progress with about 6 years to go. And they figured out where we were seriously off track. In the case of Africa, only about 6% of the SDGs were on track. Globally, only 17%. So because of this huge challenge we were facing, then there was an effort to figure out how best do we get back on track. Next slide. Of course, we are all here because we love SDG localization, right? Are we on the same page? All right. So at least 65%, I don't think it's the same, at least 65% of all the SDGs that we work with are at your level, at the level of local and regional governments. So this is very, very important. So because of this, the political declaration that was adopted at the SDG Summit in 2023 came up with what are called the transformative transitions to accelerate progress. Next slide. So these 6 transitions relate to food systems, energy access and affordability, digitalization, where you will talk of connectivity, including artificial intelligence issues that are dominating our lives nowadays, education, jobs and social protection, and of course, addressing climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. These ideas or these areas were identified by what is called the United Nations Sustainable Development Group. So they were really consultative within the UN family. So what is important? This is something that we get from countries. Next slide. Countries always come to us and say, but why are you giving us a new agenda? They are not a new agenda at all. All right? They are simply a framework that recognizes the integrated, universal, and indivisible nature of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that we have, which means if you invest in them, you are likely to have multiplier effects across several SDGs. Of course, they have certain characteristics. They are characterized by long-term change, and of course, they are based on disruption and innovation. They also entail simultaneous transformation of multiple systems. It could be energy, it could be agriculture, and of course, there are dimensions that we also talk about: technological dimension, organizational, cultural, political. They also create winners and losers. It's very important for you to understand that So which means you have to really think through when you're trying to apply these transformations. Next slide. I'll try to sprint through this. So what do we mean when you hear the term food systems transition? First, you need to understand what we mean by food systems. So when you talk of food systems, you are talking of the sum of actors and interactions along the food value chain, from input supply and production of crops, livestock, fish, and other agricultural commodities, to transportation, processing, retailing, wholesaling. Of course, after we ate, what happened to the food we left on the table? What happens to it, right, in terms of disposal? This is what we mean by a food system. So when we think of a food system transformation, we are thinking of a paradigm shift at all stages towards the objectives to become healthy and nutritious. We need healthy and nutritious food, inclusive environmental sustainable issues, and of course, resiliency. This is what basically we think of when we talk of food systems transition. Why is this an important area to invest in? Agriculture, or this agricultural food system alone, employs about 1.2 billion people on planet Earth. So whatever you do, you are touching the lives of about 1.2 billion people, which is a lot of people. Next slide. Next slide. So if you really look at how they are linked to so many SDGs, in a nutshell, these are the SDGs that you are likely to have an impact if you really invest in your food systems. So from almost, I don't know, right, every SDG is kind of related to food systems transition. Next slide. Energy transition, what do we mean? Here, basically, we're talking of the process of shifting the global energy system from dirty energy to modern, renewable, and clean energy sources. Of course, this is supposed to happen in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. This is where the big fight is, if you follow discussions at the COP, for instance, right? Why is this important? What percent of the world's population lives in urban areas? 30%, 40%, 60%, 70%? Any number? About 70%. So which means urban environments in our cities are going to consume about 2/3 of the world's energy. And of course, that means they will also produce about 70% of global CO2 emissions. That is a lot. So we need to really invest in energy transitions. If you look at Africa, for instance, if we are to follow the high income growth status, right, that was followed by the US and Western societies, Africa will add about 9.4 gigatons of carbon emissions by 2050. And we will deal with more droughts and extreme weather events if we don't change course. This is why investing in energy transition is important. In terms of SDGs, you can slide on. These are the SDGs you're looking at if you really invest in your energy transition. Next slide. Then the next one, the third one, is digital transition. What do we mean by this? Basically, here we are talking about the process by which economic stakeholders integrate digital technologies into all aspects of their activity, transforming models of consumption, production, and social interaction, which basically means we have to think about ICTs, applications and services. How do we close the digital divide? How do we empower people in societies when you think of access to some of these services? Next slide. Of course, the contributions they make to the SDGs, again, this is a grouping of the SDGs that you're likely to see positive gains. Then the next one, the fourth transition, is called the education transition. What is this? This is the process or a set of processes that comprise the transformation of your education systems with a view to protecting the rights of individuals throughout the life cycle, in particular, the right to education. In Zimbabwe, you have education what? 5.0. Does it talk to this? Yes, that's the answer from the president's office. So its goal basically is to improve prospects for social and economic well-being, reducing inequality, strengthening social mobility and cohesion, preparing societies for green and digital economies of the future. It is based on human rights and dignity, social justice, inclusion, protection, cultural and linguistic and ethnic diversity, and of course, issues of accountability. Next slide. We get to the SDGs that are likely to benefit if we invest in this particular transition. The next one, jobs and social protection. What do we refer to? Basically, this is about moving towards societies that are capable of creating decent jobs and establishing sustainable, universal social protection systems, not social safety nets. Right? We're not talking of social safety nets, which are very cheap for governments. For a Minister of Finance person, you're looking at social safety nets, it does not eat much into your budget. But if you took off universal social protection throughout your life cycle, now we're talking of big money. So this is very, very important. Obviously, this is key to what is called the Job Accelerator, the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transitions that was launched by the Secretary General in 2021. We are looking at about 400 million jobs that need to be created. Of course, many of our countries are dealing with massive youth unemployment challenges. So investing in jobs and social protection is a major area where we can benefit. In terms of the SDGs you can look at, in terms of benefits, there are several. Then the last one, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. What is it? Basically, we're talking about limiting the average global temperature rise to no more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, while continuing to pursue the 1.5 degrees Celsius target that came out of the Paris Agreement, right? Of course, at Baku and of course with the new regime in Washington, who knows what will happen to some of these things. So in terms of the SDGs that are likely to benefit, these are the SDGs you're looking at. So there are a lot. Now we come to localization. So how do you take these big ideas to local level? Right? We all love SDG localization, but I hope we all understand what we mean when we talk of SDG localization. Do we have the same definition of SDG localization in Mozambique, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Nigeria? Maybe not, maybe yes. But here I do provide, you can look at it later. So I'll give you 3 examples. We have 6, but in the interest of time, I'll just focus on 3 in terms of how you can think about them at the local level: food systems, energy, and digitalization. So when you talk of localizing food systems, here we want to transform your agri-food systems to increase their efficiency, inclusiveness, resilience, and sustainability at the local level. This is what we basically mean. So here, if you do it well, you will increase the supply and access to fresh food at the local level, increase economic resilience for your local communities, implement more environmentally sustainable food system policies at the local level. Basically, this is how you can think of food systems in your local context. Next slide. Then you go to the local energy transition. We heard from Stanley, who kind of discussed a little bit of what he's dealing with in South Africa. So when you think of local energy transition, here we think of decentralized approach or approaches in which your local authorities or your municipality play a key role in the transition to a low carbon energy system. This can be done by designing and implementing policies that promote renewable energy and greater energy efficiency, right? I don't know how many cities or municipalities are actually focusing on this. There is an interest in this work, but it's expensive. It can also be defined as the transition from centralized fossil and nuclear energy generation systems, which is where South Africa is, right? This is where the big political fight in South Africa is. We are being told by the World Bank and other big players, give up your fossil fuels, give up anything that you might have, and move to clean energy and other sources, solar and other things. So basically, this is based on the notion that the national clean energy transition is important for climate change issues, positive growth, but it has to start locally, right? Of course, you need place-based renewable energy solutions. What are these place-based local energy solutions? Local energy grids, they could be solar, off-farm systems. You could be relying on wind. Of course, you could have other sources that you might have in your community. I'll skip and then I'll go to the third one, digital transition. How can you localize this one? So when we think of localizing the digital transition, here we are adapting processes of moving from your analog systems to digital technologies to the specific needs, cultural context, and infrastructure of a particular region or community, ensuring that everyone has access to the benefits of digital advancements, regardless of where they live or their background. This is the key lesson we learned from COVID, especially when it came to education. Or was it somebody who was saying somebody could be in Etokini, in some rural area, and they don't have the same technology that another kid has in another place? So how do we address those issues, right? You can think of it from a localization perspective. So if you take agriculture, for instance, you are employing artificial intelligence and digital solutions to manage your soil and irrigation systems, to do weather forecasting, to when you plant your crops, or when you are trying to predict disease patterns, or when you're trying to manage your livestock, or trying to improve market access. Anyone who is doing farming on this side here? All right, how many of you apply any of this AI or some of these systems? Even your cell phone to get market prices, right? You're localizing. You are trying to find your local prices, right? In terms of my tomatoes will fetch this much at the local market today. So this is not a big idea. This is what people are already doing. If you think of healthcare, we talk of e-health and health apps, right? We are using those, right? But are they culturally sensitive? We have our communities that speak so many things and that believe in so many things. Is that app that we try to communicate respectful in terms of culture, right? So this is what we think when we talk of localizing your digital transformation systems. If you think of education again, your online learning platforms, do they have localized content? The famous example is an African kid. We were learning about examples from Europe. They were talking of apples. How many of us knew apples when we were young? 1 apple plus 2 apples equals to whatever. I have no idea what an apple looks like, right? But if you say, what do you call matoko in English, or some traditional local fruit that you have in your area, a kid can relate to that, right? So this is what we mean when you say your learning platforms, when you really make this transition work, it should use local examples that people can relate to. When you talk of e-government services, right, you are now digitalizing our administrative processes. We have to consider local languages if we want to improve access, right? And accessibility issues. So in many ways, these are things that we are doing, but we're not thinking of them in terms of transitions, but they're already there. So the UN Sustainable Development Group said, if we focus on these and invest in them, we can really make significant progress in what we are trying to do. So when you think of the digital transition, it's always very important. You need to understand your local needs. I think we heard that when we try to go around promoting SDGs, it's very important for us to use local languages, right? Otherwise, what you're saying, it does not relate. So language adaptation is very, very important. Is it culturally relevant? And of course, if there are other things, capacity building and infrastructure development. But for all of this to work, your transitions must be planned in an integrated manner with what we call intelligent foresight. My colleague who said you can access capacity building support from DESA, they have capacity building workshops they are organizing online or in person where they are now focusing on intelligent foresight and strategic thinking. How can you do it? So the resources are there for you if you really want to benefit from this. But if you want to make durable progress on any of these transitions, you must also ensure that you see gains in other areas. So which means you need to have a new generation of public policies that are informed by a clear national vision. Zimbabwe, are developing NDS2, which means you are coming up with a new clear vision for the country. Do you have strategic governance and anticipatory management practices? Of course, capacities for innovation and foresight. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Amson, for putting us in context in terms of the 6 transitions. Indeed, you were right that even myself, I quickly drew a conclusion that this is now a different agenda. We were used to the 5 Ps when we look at SDGs, but now this one is now a different dimension altogether. So I hope colleagues will embrace these transitions and as we internalize them. Right. I don't know. Is Rogers now connected? He's online. All right.
I'm online. I'm online.
All right. Oh, thank you very much, Rogers. So you are coming up next. You are the next presenter. Over to you, Rogers.
Thank you, moderator, and good afternoon, colleagues in Vic Falls. And it's unfortunate I was not available to be with you to really enjoy the Vic Falls because of other commitments I have in which I have to do in person. But what I'm going to do, I'm not going to go through the presentation because of time, because you have got the presentation and it will be shared with you. I will just highlight it for the benefit of to be economic on time. And my presentation is actually entitled Advancing the SDG Push with Equitable Low Carbon Pathways, comprehensive overview of key insights and recommendations. And it's based on a report which was actually launched by UNDP at the um, COP conference in Baku, which really is really trying to bring the science of saying no, transformation is possible. And I think this came out of the 2023 Global Sustainable Development Report, which was put together by a group of international scientists, which is actually entitled Times of Crisis, Time of Change, Science for Accelerating Transformation for Sustainable Development. And what that report highlights is that transformations are possible, and transformation go through phases. And the phase is like you find old technology, phasing out, and new technology emerging and accelerating and stabilizing. And those transformations also happen in terms of if you look at development. And what Amson was talking about is really those transformations in terms of human well-being and capacity, in terms of food systems, in terms of urbanization, decarbonization, in terms of even the economy and also the global commons. But for those transformations to happen, you need levers. What are the acupuncture points? And one of the key issues when we talk of localizing the SDGs, we need to highlight those levers. And one of the levers which came out of that report is this issue of governance. Good governance is key to accelerate the transformation of the SDGs at the local level. Finance and the economy is key. There was a session on finance which highlighted this issue of that you need to finance the SDGs. You need investments to move to finance even sustainable development. You need individual and collective action. At the individual level, we need to change. We need to have a sustainable mindset that if I want to go to, for instance, here I stay in Johannesburg. If I want to go to Pretoria, instead of driving, I can take a train and I reduce the carbon footprint. And at the collective level, how can we, as a collective, advance sustainable development? Then the other one is science and technology, which Amson has talked about, because we know science can be a lever. Even AI can help us even to prioritize the SDGs in terms of looking at the SDGs with the highest linkages and even the synergies between climate and the SDGs. And last but not least is this elephant in the room, capacity building. We all know that both at the national and local level, the capacity to implement the SDGs is lacking. How do we build that capacity? Capacity of financial management and so on. So those are really the levers. If you look at the SDG push, South Africa was one of the pilots of this, and there were actually 5 pilots. South Africa, in Africa, in Namibia, and then in Asia, it was Indonesia, then there was Peru and Moldova. And so really, when we did this, it was really trying to see if we do these levers, how can these levers actually help us in terms of accelerating the SDGs? But that was SDG push 2.0. But we also looked at, if we look at this SDG 2.0 and you compare it with the business as usual, first we can accelerate the SDGs. But if you really want to go further, you need you need to see how you can actually be much more ambitious. And when we look at the being ambitious, we are saying, how can we combine human development and low carbon strategies? This is what we term, SDG push with equitable carbon pathways. And what we are doing there is basically to say high income countries should actually adjust more in terms of their energy consumption. And they should provide the resources to countries who are lagging behind. So there is this, this common and differentiated responsibilities. So the huge burden of the transition to net zero should actually be borne by advanced countries and upper middle income countries. And then we actually ramp up energy consumption and energy investment in low income countries. And once you do that, if you look at that, even try to compare what happens if you have that equitable low carbon pathway, SDG 3.0, you find that if you actually look at it up to 2050, there will be very few people in the world, living under poverty. Only 160 million fewer people. And then 149 million will be living under malnutrition, and infant mortality will go down by 17%. And there is actually high life expectancy and education attainment. And even if you look at the energy mix, 69% will be from renewables. And by 2000, it will be 94%. And there is even a decrease in carbon emissions. And global temperature will be limited to 1.6 centigrade. So what you can tell there is that because when I was listening, and I listened even to Armstrong's presentation in the morning, where he talked about the fragmentation in terms of implementing the SDGs. The other fragmentation is there is a lack of synergy between implementation of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. Yet evidence shows that if we implement this jointly, we can actually accelerate the SDG further and actually, improve human development. So I think what is important is whenever we are talking of localizing the SDGs, let's make sure that localization is done in synergy with the climate agreement. And even recently, I was reading a paper which came out in Nature and Communications, which looked at countries' national development plans and their national determined contributions using machine learning. And what was found from those was quite, was not encouraging. That most national development plans are not linked to the national determined contributions. So because the SDGs are implemented, in some cases, National Planning Commission, Minister of Finance, Minister of Planning, in Zimbabwe, Minister of Public Service, which is in the forefront. NCDs are the domain of the Minister of Environment. So there is that fragmentation, even the way the government is implementing this. So really, I think the issue is how do we make sure that there is that synergy and these two ministries talk together so that the national development plans mainstream the NCDs. There are also some encouraging countries, for instance, Tuvalu's national development plan talks to the NCDs, and it talks of NCDs, the synergy with investment in health and education. South Africa, for instance, its NCD talks to about 21 SDGs. So I think those are quite a number of examples which we can draw from. Denmark, you look at their national development plan, it talks to the circular economy and even biodiversity. So that linkage between, the climate, environment, it needs to come out if we really want to move the needle on the SDGs. So in a nutshell, what I'm basically saying is that when we talk of localizing the SDGs, there is a need to make sure that we prioritize these 6 transitions, which Armstrong has talked about. But when we talk about them, we need to talk about the integrated approach of how we do this and even find the point of entry. And the point of entry is key because country context matters. If you are comparing, for instance, South Africa and Mozambique in terms of the point of entry for accelerating the SDGs, they are bound to be different. For instance, in South Africa, the challenge is the three triple development challenges. So the point of entry there is really how the economy goes, how you address that. But if you go to a low-income country, for instance, it may be agriculture, investing in agriculture in rural areas, sending girls to school has got multiply effects on the other SDGs. So country context matters and even at the local level. For instance, people from here in South Africa, where there was Buffalo City who were presenting on the VLR, how they've mainstreamed the SDG, Buffalo City, Etofini, and so on. The point of entry to accelerate the SDGs in Rustenburg, which is a rural metropolitan, are quite different from Buffalo and the other Joburg, for instance. So context matters in terms of if you want to prioritize the SDGs, which will actually give you the highest bang for the dollar. And of course, the good thing is the science is there. When the SDGs were adopted, we did not know even, I remember I used to be in the UN and I recently left the UN. We did not know how to implement the SDGs. We're saying there are too many. If countries were failing to implement the MDGs, which were few, how would they implement now 17 goals, 169 targets, 232 indicators? But the beauty of the SDGs is they are integrated and there are points, there are SDGs which you can prioritize depending on your context, which has got high multiply effects. And the important thing is this issue of integration, how you combine, the interventions, governance, green economy, and digital innovations, align SDGs and climate goals, and also partnerships. It's quite key because that's how you mobilize climate finance and development financing. And I think what is also important is how do we work with academic institutions? Because that's where you strengthen the science policy interface. Because one weakness we have is the science policy interface is very weak. Academicians write a lot of these papers which show these linkages, but they don't feed into policy. How can we make sure we work closely with academicians, with scientists, so that they can tell us how we address the bottlenecks of the SDGs? And also the academicians should write these papers in simple language so that politicians and policymakers can understand them. And also invest in research to even at the local level to understand what are the SDGs with the highest multipliers at the local level. And I want to finish by emphasizing that there is only one country which has done that, looking at each province, looking at the SDGs, which will have high multiplier effects at the provincial level. And it's China. In fact, China has contributed a lot to the SDGs at both the national and local level. And it would be good if local authorities can also invest in that, working with their national counterparts to understand what are the SDGs at the local level with the highest synergies. And of course, for that, you need also both leadership and innovations for that to happen. And the science is there. Well, that's what I need to emphasize. The science is there to implement even these 6 transitions. But of course, what is important when you implement them is understand your context. Do a thorough analysis to say, which is the point of entry which I can use. For instance, Benin in Africa used SDG 6 as its point of entry for the transitions. And when they look at that, it actually has a high multiplier effects on the other SDGs. So let me end there. I thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Rogers, for the presentation. Indeed, you brought a different dimension in the form of the levers drawing from the report that you indicated. Indeed, you also emphasized the issue of integration, country context analysis, as well as the issue of partnerships. Thank you very much. I hope colleagues, you are taking note of your comments and questions for Rogers when we open up for plenary. Allow me to move on to the next presentation from Gertrude on the experience of the UN country team in Zimbabwe in integrating the 6 transitions into joint work plans. Over to you, Gertrude.
Hey, those who designed this table, they did have us in mind. It's very unfair. It's a dancing table and it's also almost my height. Okay. Is the presentation coming up? Okay. So whilst the presentation is coming up, that will not stop us. I've always said whether technology is there or is not there, we can always proceed. I think what I'm going to do, for us to be fast, I'm going to be using questions. Because I think what I'm doing is actually also what Amson has talked about, what Rogers has talked about, but I'm contextualizing it in terms of the Zimbabwean context and how the UN in Zimbabwe is pushing towards the transformation, the implementation of the 6 transitions. So in UN, the UN in Zimbabwe, the country team is composed of 25 entities. The 25 entities, there are some who are non-resident, like UNDESA, UNECA, they are non-resident entities, and there are entities which are resident. So my question to you, especially from the local authorities, how many stakeholders or key players do we have in your local authority? The key players. Can someone just say a number? Do you know how many? Oh, it's not. Oh, because I move. I'm a preacher at church. That's the problem. How many key players do you have? The key stakeholders, the key players supporting you to deliver on your agenda? Many, like many. What is many? A number? More than 30. Great. Okay, so if you have more than 30, you are almost like the UN system, which has 25 agencies trying to deliver on the same agenda. So with your 30 stakeholders, do you have a plan, like a joint work plan with the 30 stakeholders? Let's use the 30. I'm not looking at you only. It's everyone. Assuming you have 30 organizations working in Zishawane or working in a certain district in South Africa, do you have like a joint work plan with them? Yes, we need.
Yes, we do have a work plan with them through the committee that brings together those organizations, the RDDC, the Rural District Development Committee, and also through council committees, where most of these organizations attend meetings together with council.
Great. Thank you. So the concept of joint work plan is not new. We all do that. Why do we pull together? Why do we do the joint work plans? Colleagues, don't let me talk to myself. Why do you pull together those different stakeholders and develop a joint work plan?
Share resources.
Share resources.
And move in one direction.
Avoid duplication. Get best ideas. At the back there, at least some people at the back say something. Collaboration. Achieve the same results. Yes. Okay. The rest also are the additional. So that's the same concept the UN uses, because we are 25 UN agencies. We develop the joint work plan. The joint work plan is developed together with the government of Zimbabwe and other stakeholders to deliver on the sustainable development goals, and also now with a specific focus on the 6 transitions. Okay, are the transitions different from the Ps? I heard Motsi said, now we're talking about transitions, now you were talking about the Ps. What song are we dancing now? Are the transitions different from the 5 Ps? Are they different? So they are not different. Because we have the 5 Ps. For us, the first P, we just summarize it as people. So for the SDGs, the social and all those different names. But you find like education is already falling within the Ps. So it's not something different. It's just elevating, trying to find a lever to accelerate implementation of the SDGs. For the jobs and social protection, you would find it falls under the people and prosperity, which, for example, for Zimbabwean context, that will be the social and economic. So still we are talking about the same things, but what they've only done is to identify the accelerators, the wheels which can move us faster and deliver better. Under planet, which is environment in our context, for example, you have climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution, energy access and affordability, food systems, then cross-cutting digital connectivity. I think even as Amson presented, you saw the slide which said education, health, different components. Indeed, so for us, we say it's cross-cutting a transition. So this is how the transitions can be mainstreamed even into your joint programs. For example, in a local authority, you have an environment committee. The committee has a plan. So the committee simply needs to identify climate change, biodiversity, energy access, food systems, and elevate those. So you are not going to think outside your framework. It's within your framework, and then map out what is already existing and then identify what can be done better. And it, hey, hello. Am I too fast? The speed is okay, because I think most people now want to go. Okay. So the next question is, what are the conditions for this transition to happen? What are the conditions for this transition to happen? The condition number one is effective policies and regulatory frameworks. That is, there should be an enabling environment. You are even talking about different stakeholders. They can be the private sector, the banks, those who want to invest. Are they enabling policies to allow for that? Then national and subnational capacity strengthening. Are the institutions, that is the local authority, does it have enough capacity to absorb the digital technology being referred to, the different elements of being able to move the transition fast? So you need also to have the national and subnational capacity strengthening for transparent, accountable governance, for climate change adaptation, for delivery of quality evidence-based public services. The other condition is identification and development of bankable and market-ready national projects, because you need to invest. Donor funds are dwindling. They're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So it needs to talk about bankable projects, market-ready projects, which can help local authorities and the national government to generate income, to invest better. That is how we can move faster. And as an example, for example, renewable energy, I think it was mentioned even in some conversations by another local authority about investing. How do you invite? How do you lure? How do you attract investors? For example, a solar power plant with a power purchase agreement is signed, so that there is mutual benefit. And remember, Amson mentioned about losses and benefits. So we'd want to make sure it's balanced to attract the different investors to come in. Convening and coordination of all stakeholders. You mentioned the 30 stakeholders. Unless you can bring them together, then you will not be able to deliver on the transitions. For example, somebody delivering on education, somebody delivering on energy. Those are related because you have rural schools which needs energy. So bring together the different stakeholders to speak together and be able to do jointly and be able to deliver effectively. Empowering communities. This one I always not forget it. We need the communities to be empowered to demand their rights and to fulfill their obligations or responsibilities. I remember, I think it's the mayor who was saying people now are demanding services and they don't want to pay for them. It's about also empowering communities to understand where you are coming from. So these are some of the conditions which are necessary for the transformation to happen. And the UN system in Zimbabwe, we invest, or we are structured in all these strategic areas in terms of advocacy for police, in terms of capacity building of institutions, in terms of supporting the national government to identify and develop bankable and market-ready national projects, convene different stakeholders. We have the Development Partners Forum, the Joint Steering Committee, which brings all stakeholders together, including the donors, then results groups. Okay, then just as an example, the last slide, how we have integrated it into the joint programs. I'll just use the jobs and social protection coverage. So we also did a mapping exercise, because what is important is to understand that this is not something new you are being introduced to. You need now to do a mapping exercise of what is already happening, then identify the gaps or the challenges which are being faced for you to be able to move it as a transition. So for jobs and social protection, those are some of the SDGs which will benefit or which will be moved once we invest in that. Then for us, we had to map against the National Development Strategy to see, as the UN in Zimbabwe, under the jobs and social protection, which key indicators are we going to support if we invest in this area? But it is important also to show the relevance. Then here we have done the mapping of the UN entities and the different programs they are implementing, so that when it comes to monitoring and tracking, you are also aware in terms of which programs are helping to deliver on these transitions. So we have done the mapping, this kind of mapping for all the 6 transitions. But I will not go through all of them. I'll go to the last slide. You can move to the last slide. This one. Oh, yes, I move back, sorry. For us, we have added the 7th. It's not a transition, but it's a body of the transitions. We have added data. Why? Because we cannot talk of those transitions and deliver without investing in data. So for us, we talk in Zimbabwe, we talk about the 6 transitions plus D, the data, where we have also said we need to promote availability and quality of data and mapping agencies who are supporting investments in data, so that we'll be able to track progress in the transitions and be able to do data and evidence-based management of results. The last slide. Challenges and lessons learned. I mentioned about dwindling resources. There's need to strengthen coordination. And in our case, we say we have one UN approach through the joint programs where we understand who is doing what and where to avoid duplication and be able to use the resources efficiently. Then also the other challenges, coordination challenges, it's not easy. You can agree with me, the 30 stakeholders are not easy to coordinate, but a clear mandate and situation assessments are essential for a unified agenda. Understanding each stakeholder, their mandate, the gaps they are filling in, therefore you can be able to move together with a clear and unified agenda. Limited capacity for scaling innovations, ongoing institutional capacity building is important, investing capacity building. The conflicting interest, this one is not avoidable because we all come from different angles with the different agendas, with different mandates, even in the UN. But what is important is the evidence-based situation analysis. I remember in Amson's presentation, there was a slide in terms of needs assessment. So if you have your situation analysis, even as a council, even as a local authority, any stakeholders who are coming, you are showing them your situation analysis to say, this is how the local authority is structured, these are where the gaps are, this is where we need investments because we have this data. That way you can avoid, you can be able to address conflicting interests because it's evidence-based. That's why we have invested in D, the data, supporting the national statistical system in terms of the government and the different stakeholders. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you very much, Gertrude, for the presentation. Indeed, you reassured us that we are not reinventing the wheel in terms of the 6 transitions. And also, hopefully, our local authorities that have their voluntary local review reports, you already see that the current reports that we have, automatically we need to adjust accordingly, given the presentation that we've had, as well as you outline the conditions for successful application in the Zimbabwean context. And also the issue of data is an additional transition to the 6 transitions that we have. I'm sure colleagues would agree the issue of data also came out in terms of the presentations that we had yesterday from local authorities from the 3 countries, as well as in the morning. Right, so thank you very much. The last presentation on this session, we are going to have Ms. Hilosius Shaturuka to take us through. Over to you, madam.
I know that you believe that I used to be a preacher then, but today I'm a new convert. Thank you. So today, what I just want to say is, okay, good evening. The preacher is not going to preach. I had really wanted to share this presentation, but I'm also checking on our time. So we have prepared this presentation for your information. Please find time to just go through some of the things that we have done in Zimbabwe, right? I've done just Just cruise through. Mr. Banda, please cruise through. Okay, that's what our performance in terms of the global report. That's how we are performing according to each of the goals. Where you see the gray, we don't have data. We were not reporting on that. But in terms of the regional average, we are actually performing a little bit better, but not very bad. Let's move on. Then the localization, I think we have spoken much about this. Let's move on. The 6 transitions, we have already spoken about this. Let's move on. So those are some of the programs that we are currently implementing in Zimbabwe in terms of towards the achievement of the food systems, right? We have the Pumbuza in Twasa, where we are trying to implement the drought-resilient model of doing farming, which has actually raised our productivity. Let's move on. Then in terms of our electricity generation and access, we have seen a rapid increase in terms of electricity access, which is now, actually it was in 2022, it was around 62%, but up from 49%. And because of this increased adoption of clean energy, solar, I guess that figure has already increased. And the use of PPPs and also tapping into climate funds, those are some of the key interventions that are helping us achieve that. Let's move on. Then in terms of digital connectivity, we have also seen that the population that have access to cell phones has actually improved to 87.9%. That was in 2022. Why am I referring to 2022? Because that's when we did our national census, national population and housing census. That's why I'm more comfortable using the nationally adopted statistics. Then we have also seen the use of computers and internet for pedagogical purposes, that is in schools, which is around 30%, but we know we can still do more. And also we have seen that we are rolling out some solar for education programs, which will also help improve on that. And also the provision of e-services, which is another example. Then we have also digitalized our case management, where you don't have to be visiting the courts every now and then. But because of the e-services, because of the case management, you can actually view the status of your court case while in the comfort of your homes, right? It's much more convenient, and it's also cost effective because this question, no. No, this is in terms of if you want to check the status of when you are required to appear in court and etc. All right, now we have also reduced the amount of time that you spend waiting for your passport. Previously, passports were even taking more than 3 months, 6 months, but now it's way less than 7 days, which is you see the benefits of adopting the digital connectivity. Yes, and some of the key interventions, the PPPs, there are also, and expansion in internet infrastructure. These are some of the things that we have also done. Let's move on. Then in terms of education, I think you have heard that we are currently implementing the 5.0, but what I wanted to speak to is that if you look at our average completion rate, I think we are doing well, because that's close to, it's averaging 90 for primary education and ECDs. Then for secondary, I know, yeah, but there is a concern in terms of the upper secondary, which is slightly lower, but I guess we understand the dynamics around that. But in terms of our literacy rate, we are doing quite well, because we are having about 93.6% in terms of that. Then also, to add to access to education, we also have what we call the BEAM program, which is Basic Education Assistance Module, where we pay fees for the vulnerable children to allow them to access education, because we need to be as inclusive as possible when we are talking about SDGs implementation. We also need to think of what will become of those children who cannot afford to pay, or whose parents cannot afford to pay for the fees. So that program is actually doing very well in transforming the lives of the marginalized groups. Then I will not speak to that, but it's just some of the programs that are being done to ensure that as we implement these 6 transitions, we also need to make sure that we also cover the marginalized through the provision of food provisions, as well as medical treatment orders to assist those who cannot access. Then in terms of climate change and biodiversity, we have the National Adaptation Plan. We also have low emission development strategies, and we also have our nationally determined contributions, which is actually in place and which is continuously reviewed in line with the COP agreements. Yes, let's move on. But those challenges, I will not speak to them. But we know that for us to achieve the transitions, we need to address the issues of data, which Gertrude spoke about. The issues of financial resources is also critical because we need to fund the budget. Limited access to infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, it's also another challenge that may actually affect the implementation of the digital connectivity transition. So we also need to emphasize on that. Then, so what is our focus? As we move forward to 2030, we need to focus on those programs and projects that will allow us to accelerate the implementation of our own national plan, as well as the regional and continental agenda. Thank you so much, and over to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Madam Chaturuka. Right, for giving us a synopsis of the Zimbabwean experience in terms of how the 6 transitions apply to our case in Zimbabwe. Thank you very much for that. All right, colleagues, we have come to the stage where we are going to ask you for 3 burning questions or interventions. Yeah, I've heard a comment to say none. 3 burning interventions or questions. Yes, Vashiraya, and then I'll come to you and then. All right. Yes, Vashiraya.
Thank you very much and for the presenters. And I really enjoyed these presentations and the localization of the SDGs. But my question is to all the presenters, what are we doing in using the IKS, the indigenous knowledge systems, in localizing our SDGs? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. We can have the second one. Yes, South Africa.
Thank you very much. I'll be short. The 6 transitions there by Mr. Amson. Yes, they are very key. But I see there's it might have been there in your presentation, the issue of justice and strong institutions. Because it's very key. If you don't build those stronger ones, we might have all those being implemented, but at somebody's expense. Because what George raised earlier on about the city being taken to courts regarding services that they need to be providing to communities, it might be leading to us not being able to protect or build a stronger institution. So I proposing, but moving forward, that we need to see how we put it. Maybe outside those 6 transition, or finding a way to say over and above having these. Yes, we really need partnerships, but the stronger institutions are very key, because I cannot give somebody money who's not operating well on good governance and other stuff. Like in our case, I mean, we've got Auditor General. Yes, there are questions that are being asked. You might have good books, but you're not providing services. But if you are having good books, but service is not happening there, it means there's something is lacking in part of the being a stronger institution. You might be aligning yourself with one thing, to be in good books, but not implementing services. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that question. Right, the third one.
Thank you so much. Say very good presentations. I wanted to check from Amson whether they can be very short. brief, what do you call it, like products or brief papers around what you have presented, and also Rogers. But Ruka, I think I didn't see the mitigation strategy for Zim. I thought I only see the adaptation. Sorry for my double posting. If you did that already, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for the questions. Right. Whom do I start with? Amson.
right.
I've seen there were two questions for you there.
Use of indigenous knowledge to address the issues, the challenges we face. When we talk of climate change adaptation, are we not promoting our local plants, our local trees? So that is use of indigenous knowledge, because we are saying we can rely on what is available in our environments and not plant gum trees, right? That's one example where you can. Yesterday, there was somebody who said we need to involve chiefs and local leaders and traditional leaders. That you are tapping into indigenous knowledge to come up with solutions, right? When you do other things in terms of agriculture, or when you try to engage, when we say education transition, right? How do we reach to these various communities that we have? We know that there are ways to approach them. You are using your indigenous knowledge to engage them, to bring them on board. So some of these things you are doing them already, but you are not thinking of indigenous knowledge. I agree with Teboho, justice and strong issues are key. If we're saying these are the investment pathways, we are not saying government should do it alone, right? We are now having so many players in the energy sector, for instance. Unless if their investments are not protected, then how can they put their money? So we assume that strong institutions in justice, these things are in place. So maybe I'll say that, and then I don't know, Lucius and Gertrude can also chip in. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me call upon Gertrude. Any interventions? The one on indigenous knowledge system, it was cross-cutting, as well as the addition of justice and strong institutions. What's your take?
Sorry. So I am saying, I think in terms of the indigenous, the question on indigenous, I think Amson is addressed it through the different interventions. So what I can contribute is in terms of the other question on the just institutions. So when you look at issues of capacity building, you are looking at these are institutions. It will be cross-cutting because the issues of policy, the issues of justice, the issues of human rights. If you look at my slide, the second slide, which had capacity building, it had also the first bullet on transparent and accountable institutions. So you are right, in terms of all this to happen, there is need for those strong institutions. That's why we are also speaking to sub-national and national capacity building. And in our case, we look at institutions in terms of human development, in terms of the transparency and accountable institutions, in terms of the climate, in terms of economic empowerment. So that component, when you look at a sub-national, international institutional capacity building, it touches on on all the other elements. And by putting in place the first condition where we are saying the enabling environment, the environment is also that policy and regulatory frameworks also contribute to providing a strong and accountable institutions to be able to deliver on this. And through the multiplier effect of the transitions.
All right. Thank you very much, Gertrude, for the clarifications. We may now move on to Rogers. What's your take on the comments, the three burning questions that we have had from the floor? Over to you, Rogers.
Okay, thank you, moderator. Just to add on the indigenous knowledge, I think you heard me when I was talking to saying that we need to strengthen the science policy interface. And when we talk of science, we are talking, science is a generic term. We are also saying indigenous knowledge is part of science. And the tendency among us as Africans is we tend not to value our indigenous knowledge. And actually, it has been found that if you look at most of indigenous communities, They have got this indigenous knowledge that they want to live in harmony with nature. And if you look at people who are even advancing nature-based solutions, it's actually based on that indigenous knowledge. So really, science is a broad term. It doesn't mean it has to come from, the academicians, even our elders. That knowledge, we can tap into it to advance, development. In particular, there are some knowledge which we know traditionally, used to be used to even address issues of climate change and so on. So I thought I should highlight that to reinforce what Emerson said. Then when we come to the issue of governance, why governance is not part of the 6 transitions. Remember when I was talking about the Global Sustainable Development Report, which was done by scientists. And before that, there was one which was done in 2019. There will be another one which will be done in 2017. Both of them talk of these transitions, which we are talking about. But they say for this transition to happen, there are the levers, there are some entry points. And you see one of the entry points there is governance, good governance. It's quite key. How you address issues of corruption and so on. It's quite key. Finance and economy is another lever. The other one is individual and collective action. At the individual level, we need to also be conscious about sustainability and issues of climate change and change our behavior and at the collective level. The other one is science and technology. How do we use science to advance the SDGs, even AI, to advance the sustainable development goals? And last but not least is this issue of capacity building, which was added in this recent Global Sustainable Development Report. So these are levers, these are entry points. We can actually term them enablers. And just to emphasize, in my previous life, when countries were preparing for the SDG summit, we prepared what were called SDG Insights reports. And these SDG Insights reports were looking at what are the pathways countries can take based on the SDGs, which are prioritizing their national development plans to advance the SDGs. And we're using machine learning to see what SDGs are prioritizing the national development plan. And once we found that, we used a tool which was developed by the EU, which is called Know Your SDGs. And this tool is based by the EU doing M&E and see what happens and do some studies. And this tool can tell you the linkages of the SDGs with a lot of linkages. And for Africa, we prepared, all in all, we prepared 95 country reports covered globally. But for Africa, we prepared 44. And we deliberately, in all the reports which we did for Africa and globally, we try to see
Sorry, Rogers.
SDG. Let me summarize, okay? I'm summarizing. We looked at SDG 16.6, which is transparent and responsive institutions. How is it an enabler for all the SDGs? And indeed, that SDG has got linkages with the other SDGs and no trade-offs. So that shows you that the governance is actually an enabler for the SDGs. And what I presented, it's a global model. If you want to see, to narrow it to each country, you go to the links I provided. You can actually zero in on your country to see that if you do this, what happens. So that's actually an exercise which you can do for your country because it's tailored for global analysis. But you can actually do it, if you go to the data webpage of UNDP, you select your country, look at what happened to poverty if you do these interventions. You can actually see what happens, to your country, if you use the links I provided. That's all I can say to the question on Zimbabwe. Over.
All right. Thank you very much for summarizing. All right. I'm being told that there's no solutions. Okay. Right. Yeah. In the interest of time. All right. Okay. Okay, but there was a question on the on mitigation factors for Zimbabwe. Hopefully you do a bilateral and address it. But in one sentence, but that will be the last remark
One
of the day.
sentence.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, we are also prioritizing mitigation and early warning information systems. They are also part of it. But I couldn't include everything given that we had limited time, but we do have that in Zimbabwe. Then indigenous knowledge, I think that the emphasis has always been, let's use a multi-stakeholder approach where all the key stakeholders within your areas of jurisdiction are part of the process. And by so doing, it means that we'll also tap into that information because local challenges, some of the local challenges require local solutions from the locals. So that's all I can say. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Silosius, for that clarification. That marks as the end of the presentations and the questions and the reactions that was given by the panelists. So, allow me at this juncture to thank the panelists for their presentations, as well as to thank you, the participants, for going an extra mile. You may clap hands for yourselves. Thank you very much, and also clap hands for me as I hand over to to Carol. Over to you, Carol.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, today for your participation, for the wonderful presentations and all of the sharing that happened. So we have reached the end of day 2 now. Just to skip ahead to tomorrow. Tomorrow we have a short day, a half day. We will start at 8:30 in the morning, which is a late start compared to today. And we will have 3 sessions, one of which is a breakout group. And I think that the sessions will allow us some time for discussion, interactive discussion as well. Then that will be followed by lunch and by closing and then the lunch. And for this evening, I know that some of us are going out, and I'm actually going to hand over to Amson for more details on that.
Thank you, Carol. Just to Stanley for the shorter studies, we can always reach out and then we can discuss. For tomorrow, can I suggest something by a show of hands? We have 2 options. If you want to have a longer free afternoon, we can start at 8. And then you have more activities to do. So by a show of hands, is that something that you guys are willing? So we come at 8, and then these are the oligarchs. Oligarchs now make decisions. All right. My last announcement is Boma. For those who are going, pick up from your respective hotels is at 7 p.m. So we don't have much time to get organized. And then I think you know the deal. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evenings. I know. All right, I apologize. Carol just reminded me that we have some virtual presentations tomorrow at 10 o'clock. So if we just temper with the program, then I think, so let's stick to 8:30 in the morning. That's fine. All right. All right. So, Tebaho.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Before you go to Boma, I know she's going to Boma. It's Nomkita's birthday today.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Hip, hip. Nomkita, can we see you?